Well, good morning, everybody. Just want to thank you for joining us for what I think is going to be quite an exciting and informative webinar this morning. So you are attending the Thrive at Work COVID vaccine and workplace testing, the considerations that you would need to make as an organisation if you're going to be amending or bringing in new policies that talk around and deal with that subject. So without further ado, I'm just going to get the panelists to introduce themselves. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping after that, and then we'll get into questions and answers. So if I'll just start with who I've got on my screen. So that's Jug. Do you want to just introduce yourself?
Good morning, all. Yes, thank you, Andrew. Good morning, all. Jug Sahota. I'm a senior advisor with ACAS, been there for about 29 odd years. Deal with all sorts of issues, but also specialise in equality, diversity and inclusion. That's great. And then I've got Rob next.
Morning, Andrew. Morning, everyone. Thank you for that. Yeah, so Rob Handley, also senior advisor in ACAS, ACAS West Midlands. Same sort of role as Jug, so lots of work with organisations at the moment around lots of these areas we're talking about today.
Wonderful. And then I've got Tracy next.
Good morning, I'm Tracy McTaggart. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor at Health and Safety Executive, and I'm currently working as part of the COVID policy team. So if you go to the HSE's website and the COVID policy pages, most of them come from me.
That's great, thanks Tracy. And then Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Kelly. I'm a Senior Psychologist for HSE. Been working the last 20 years in looking at how we support people's mental health and their stress at work, and particularly now, obviously, with regards to COVID-19, the impact it's having on people's psychological health.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And then I've got my colleague Tia. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tia Smith. So I work alongside Andy at the Thrive at Work team. I'm the corporate support officer, so yeah, do all the administration processes in the background to help people get through to accreditation.
That's wonderful. So I'm Andy Rudge. I am the Thrive at Work Accreditation Coordinator. It's a very long title, but the simplicity of it is that organisations who sign up for our workplace wellbeing programme, which is Thrive at Work, then I'm kind of here to oversee your journey. And one of the reasons that we're having the webinar today is because we just want to make sure that employers across our region and beyond are getting the information they need at this time to be able to really support their employees, whether they're at home, whether they've been in the workplace throughout, or whether they are now thinking of returning into the workplace. So just a couple of bits of housekeeping from me. You'll see there's a little toolbar on your screen. So if you have a question for the panelists, and this is a Q&A session, then please put your questions in the question field. If you're having any technical issues, you can also put your questions in there. And either my colleague Tia or people we've got working behind the scenes will be able to help you to have the best experience of today that you can. There is a chat function, but if you're putting questions in there, I won't get to see those questions, so it's unlikely that they would get covered. The other thing that I do want to just say to the audience at this point in time is that COVID is a very fluid situation. We've known that. It's been ever evolving over the last 12 months and a bit. So the information that we're going to be covering and offering up today is based on latest understanding and latest knowledge and what we feel best practice is at this point in time. So we would encourage you all who are attending this webinar to stay up to date with the information. Please do keep going to the government website on coronavirus. Please do check Public Health England's website, but also ACAS's website and the Health and Safety Executive. They will be updating their information as we go through. If you've got anything specific, then we do invite you to make contact directly with those organisations after this webinar to talk through any issues or scenarios that you may need assistance with. So we did have one question come in overnight by email, and I'm just going to offer that up to our panelists to begin this webinar. So the question that came in is this: with the COVID vaccine administered, will there be any proof to carry with it? And then they go on to say, I mean, will there be any kind of vaccine passport when applying for a job or traveling? So I just want to make it clear that today we're only covering workplace considerations, so travel's kind of beyond our remit. I think that question assumes quite a few things, but I think it's a great starting place for us. So I just thought, Tracy, did you want to just kind of respond to that and give us an idea of kind of where we're at with COVID and lockdowns and returning to work, and what organisations should be considering?
Yeah, sure. I know there's discussion across government just now about COVID passports. It's all over the media. And I think Michael Gove is leading the work on that. So there's been no actual decision about how that's going to proceed. So unfortunately, I can't get my crystal ball there and tell you how it's going to look and whether you're going to need one to apply for a job. But currently, I can tell you about health and safety legislation. So, new teeth. And it's currently, there's no requirement for anybody in a non-healthcare work setting to actually have a vaccination. So whilst, you know, we're encouraging everybody to go out and get it, your employer can't demand at this point in time. I know things are possibly going to change in the future, but as we stand today, your employer can't demand that you have a vaccination and proof of that vaccination.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. I just want to bring you in as well, Jug, because I know that we had a conversation yesterday and you were aware of organisations within certain sectors that were kind of running ahead with this. Do you just want to share that with us?
Yeah, sure, Andrew. I've been involved, as I say, with a lot of industries, and in particular, the care sector has been one area, especially with if you're looking at care homes and that. And what they've been exploring is this: we're not going to employ anyone new unless they've had the vaccination. And one of the things that they need to be mindful of, and one of the pitfalls, is particularly areas of possible discrimination. So if they are having anything in place like that, just ensuring that it's not one size fits all, and they do take into account individual circumstances and needs, because at the end of the day there may be certain individuals that may not be able to have the vaccination for whatever reason, really, at the end of the day. So it's about being mindful of that. So again, those discussions are at the moment taking place.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Jug. I might bring Rob in here as well, because just you know, have you seen examples where this kind of thing, not necessarily with COVID? And one of the things I'm hoping that we can get across to the audience today is that obviously we're in a specific period of time with COVID, but there are going to be some general principles that are going to work well for organisations if they consider all of those things. So, you know, have you come across this kind of situation before, where organisations have just tried to impose a blanket policy across an organisation, and then that has caused issues? They may have fallen foul of other legislation in the process of doing that.
Yeah, there's lots and lots of examples of this in case law that exists, and it's really linked to the indirect discrimination point, really. So where you make a policy, you do a PCP, a provision, criterion or practice, which has the indirect effect of impacting on a group of individuals. That's really what the major risk here that Jug was referring to in terms of the indirect discrimination point of view. So if you change, you know, any aspect of a policy or procedure, and it does have that indirect impact, that's where the risk arises. And I think there is that significant aspect of that might come into the vaccine element, as Jug was alluding to then, when you do have groups of people that can't have it for religious reasons or disability type reasons. I think that the same sorts of principles would apply to the vaccine question, as well as, you know, the historic ones that we see in case law as well. So it's a really good point, actually, and I think that you can definitely draw those parallels.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Just want to bring you in as well, Peter. You know, obviously there's going to be a lot of focus on the vaccination, on workplace testing, but are there wider considerations that employers need to be focused and aware of at this point in time, as you know, the majority of the workforce are going to be returning to the workplace over the next few months?
And for those who've actually been working as well, key workers within the period of time, yeah, I mean, you need to give consideration also to the mental health impacts of pandemics. The reason I say this is we know that recessions cause an increase in mental ill health pandemic has always also have an associated impact on mental ill health. We've not had them together. So what we're seeing from globally is an increase in about 20% of depression and anxiety. So so that's moving from 1 in 5 to sort of 1 in 3 potentially people experiencing it. So yeah, there's an emerging mental health issue, ill health issue that's there, which also needs to be a part of that. One of the on the risk assessments that you're required to do through ourselves, we include what you're doing to support people's mental health as part of your COVID-19 risk assessments.
Okay, that's great. We've had a couple of questions come in, and one is about the care sector. I'll come back to that question in a second because it's very relevant, but just kind of following the flow of the conversation. Question that's coming says, where do we stand if employees refuse to work alongside someone who doesn't want or can't have the vaccine? Because obviously what we've seen so far is that it's unlikely that you're going to have a workplace where it is 100% everybody vaccinated and everybody will have that. So where there are these people who are exempt on whatever grounds from having the vaccine, how would you advise employers to deal with that kind of situation where you now have other employees who are prepared to have the vaccine, but then don't want to be working alongside those who haven't? Does anybody want to kind of come in on that one?
Yeah, I would just say, as an employer, Andy, you've got to make sure that your controls are in place first and foremost. People having a vaccination is not a control measure you as an employer can put in place. You have to make sure you've still got your social distancing, you've still got good hygiene and cleaning, and you've still got adequate ventilation. So if you have those in place, your employees should feel secure. So whether or not the person they're working with has a vaccination shouldn't actually be relevant as such. It's making sure you've got those controls in place to make them feel safe.
Okay, that's great. And again, another question's coming along similar lines here. So I guess that's going to be fine in a workplace where you're all working together, but where it's a workplace where you actually have customers coming in, and again going back to the care sector. So a couple of questions are coming. What about the impact of on the vulnerable with protected characteristics in receipt of care? And then what are the considerations for customers who don't want to receive care from workers who are not vaccinated?
That's basically two questions there, really, at the end of the day, Andrew. If I can take the first one, in terms of dealing with customers that coming onto premises, whether that be retail shops, whether that be normal businesses. I mean, all organisations, as Tracy has said, needs to have mechanisms in place to ensure that everyone who is around is aware that they're still having all of the necessary safety measures in place, such as social distancing, such as the ability to keep your hands clean, face coverings, etc. That's going to go on for quite some time, really, at the end of the day. So all those measures need to be in place. And again, it's the responsibility of the employer, the organisation, to ensure that customers, contractors, whoever's on their site actually adheres to all of that. And then looking at the other question that came in with regards to the care sector, and where you are providing care to individuals that don't want to be cared for by individuals who may not have had the vaccination. We've had a couple of questions around that already being posed, and I suppose if it's a service that you're providing directly, such as domiciliary care, etc., then of course it's the customer that can dictate what they want, and again it's about the organisation ensuring that they're able to provide that sort of service. Again, for themselves, it's being really mindful of whether that could be something that they may be able to justify in that particular role. If not, then they may fall foul of the discrimination legislation. So there's a lot of things to consider rather than just putting a blanket policy in place.
Okay, that's great. So, I mean, do you think we're ever going to get like a definitive ruling on this kind of thing? You know, do you foresee government passing legislation? I know that there's some talk around legislation at the moment for the care sector, isn't there?
There is a piece of legislation at the moment where they are looking to possibly look at introducing those care homes that are looking after individuals above, I believe, the age of 65, where there may be a requirement to individuals that are in that care, in that environment, to be vaccinated really at the end of the day, but they are still at the early stages of having those discussions. We're not actually sure what the end product will look like at the moment.
Right.
But there is, I think, Rob, you've got a bit more information, have you, on that? Or are you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, on the gov.uk website at the moment, there is consultation, open consultation on that issue, as you were saying then, Jug. So it's consultation in terms of whether or not they're going to make the vaccination a condition of deployment for older adult care homes. This is the specific title of it. And the proposal is that they are looking at whether or not they can legislate on that, with the intention of, for all those people that are able to have the vaccine, so again, that exclusion for the people that aren't, that, you know, they have to make that consideration for those people. But for all the people that are able to have the vaccine, whether or not that's going to be a condition of being able to be deployed to provide that care for older adults. Still in consultation though, as Doug was saying, then we don't have any definitives yet, but there is more details of that available on the gov.uk site at the moment too.
Okay, that's great. Questions coming again. This one's aimed at the care sector, but I think it has implications wider as well. Where do we stand with regards to recording whether a carer is vaccinated or not? And I guess that would, you know, for any employer, you know, where would they stand in if they would begin to ask their workforce whether, as individuals, they've been vaccinated or not? Anybody want to offer up? Jug?
Again, just basically, if an employer is doing that, they need to ensure that they are communicating with their workforce that that is what they're going to do, but they need to make it clear as to what they're going to do with that information, how long they're going to retain it. They also need to be mindful of GDPR really at the end of the day. So what is it? Why is it important that they gather that information, and what are they going to utilize that information for?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo that employers have to be mindful that this is actually personal, sensitive medical information they're asking for here. And to ask that, you have to really have good grounds for gathering that. And as Judge says, it has to be held, you know, sensitively. And, you know, GDPR asks you only to get information that you need. And, you know, there's an argument whether you actually need to get this as an employer.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Comments come in. So religious objections to vaccination. Major religions are doing their utmost to encourage members to be vaccinated if medical condition of the individual permits. Religious leaders are countering fake news, etc. about vaccinations. Employers would have to investigate very closely anyone who says my religion won't allow me to be vaccinated. I would offer a comment up as that, because, you know, I am a person of faith, so I think that actually, rather than major religions, would be maybe denominations within certain religions. How would somebody approach, or how would an employer approach that particular subject of not taking the vaccine on religious grounds?
Yeah, I think lots of this comes down to like the old test of reasonableness, doesn't it, really? So what's the reason in which they require people to be vaccinated? Is that proportionate? Is that, you know, in line with what they're trying to achieve overall? And then looking at the individual circumstances in more detail. So it's difficult to answer that with a broad brush, because we're looking at very specific individuals here, aren't we, that might have personal religious reasons. So I completely take the point. You know, I agree that lots of you know, the major religions or denominations within those are encouraging their communities to take the vaccines, but there are still you know, individual needs to consider as well. And I think that would be the risk in terms of, you know, not considering those individual needs, because that's what the employment tribunals like to be focused on, the individual rather than the whole. So that would be my concern with that sort of approach generally.
Yeah, I'm kind of aware of news stories that I've seen over the last 6 months or so, as the vaccine was developed and then rolled out, that some of the vaccines, some manufacturers have tested using aborted fetal tissue, which for some people of faith that's a no-go. I remember that the head of public health in Australia did a press conference on that, will there be alternative vaccines made available? I'm aware that the Catholic Church of the United States wrote to President Trump when he was in office, exploring similar ethical issues around, aborted fetal tissue being used in the development of the vaccine. So yeah, I think that's going to be a difficult one to kind of talk about and find a solution to. But as you say, as long as organisations are covering every post and every opportunity to make alternative arrangements, I think that's fine. So this one is for ACAS. If an employee refuses to wear a face covering because of personal belief, what can the employer do? This person is unlikely to take up a vaccine as well, a risk to the staff and business.
Okay. I think in terms of face coverings, I mean, some people don't prefer to wear the mask really at the end of the day, but you've got those see-through visors and stuff, which again allows, there's a lot of stuff that is out there and is available to try and ensure that in some shape or form those measures are adhered to. And it's about engaging with the individual to explore what other alternatives are available and what their concerns may be, ensuring that they're sensitive to, as you say, there may be religious requirements behind it. But again, it's about engaging and having that discussion with the individual and exploring what else is out there. So if they are using those face masks that you put on your ears, is there anything else that we can explore for this individual before deciding to go down any other avenue?
Okay, and can I just bring you guys in from HSC? What is current advice around wearing masks within the workplace? Obviously, a lot of people have been working from home, so throughout the course of their day, that's never been an issue. But if they are returning to the workplace, will they be expected to be wearing a mask, for the time that they're there?
HSE don't actually condone mask wearing in the workplace. Or control measures, as I've said, social distancing, cleaning, hygiene and ventilation. Face coverings aren't personal protective equipment because it's not actually about protecting you. It's hopefully about protecting the spread of the virus to those around you. And if you have the other control measures I mentioned in place, then face coverings shouldn't or don't add more to that, as long as you've got your sort of fundamental controls in place. So there's no requirement under health and safety legislation again to wear face coverings in the workplace.
Okay. Just want to bring you in as well, Peter, just slightly off at a tangent here, but obviously, all of the questions that are coming in, you can see there's a lot of anxiety, isn't there? There's just a lot of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty out there. So what tools have HSE put in place to help organisations just really communicate with their staff to kind of really establish a baseline, understand where their staff are at and how they can then help them and reassure them when they're re-entering the workplace?
I'll come to that question and also what Tracy was saying. The workplace is very much about physical interventions that are put in place, but it's psychologically we have to get people prepared when they're in work to actually respond to the things that are there. So if there are measures in place, they need to be psychologically prepared and ready to do those things. So there is a bit about working on the psychology of healthy work and helping people. So that's part of that equation. With regards to the anxiety, yes, anxiety coming into work, anxiety in work, because if you're in London and you have to get on the tube, and your only way of getting into work is that way. You can't isolate yourself, putting yourself in a car and drive to places. You're going to come into work feeling anxious. You're going to feel symptoms of mild distress if it's not been a comfortable journey in. So we've got this measure called the Talking Toolkit for work-related stress, but it's equally applicable to mental health. And it's about how you have reasonable, sensible conversations with your employees. And I also like to think, being a line manager or being a manager or being a supervisor, whichever it is, it's the same set of skills you have as a parent. And if you're not a parent but you've been parented, you know what those are. It's the ability to listen, it's the ability to sit down and actually take time with the people. If you think someone's coming in and they're feeling anxious, just spend a couple of minutes trying to offer them support. Don't say how are you, because it might that's a I'm fine question, isn't it? It's more about how was your journey into work, how are you. There's a term in Australia called how are you traveling, and it's a great way to open conversations with people, which so on a score of 1 to 10, how are you traveling? So 10 being your best and 1 being a disaster, and you can kind of get a measure. So it is the hidden element of this whole pandemic is the fact that people's mental health is part of it's being impacted, but it's also part of how we sustain people. If we can get mental health right, as well as the physical interventions, then I think we're making significant progress.
Okay, wonderful. And if anybody's on,
I'm just sorry. Can I just...
Go on. Sorry. Yes.
I was just going to say, just picking up from what Peter said, I just wanted to share something really good that I've picked up from a couple of organisations that have been in contact with me, again, around the anxiety element, where they've done a virtual walkthrough for their people coming back into the workplace to lower that anxiety. And I think there was a couple of organisations that also invited any of their individuals that were anxious to come when the business wasn't open, just to have a walkthrough and get familiar with what measures and what mechanisms they'd put in place, and that actually helped individuals. So again, ideas, thinking outside the box really does help individuals prepare themselves to go back into the working environment.
Okay.
Yeah, the fear of the unknown. And once you're in, it's also how you manage the people like me, who's a prolific talker. Actually, if I'm going to talk to people, I need to get a distance. And there's my own personal responsibility and the organisation's responsibility to manage how people feel when they're engaged with you. As it stands, I'm very good. I stand 6 feet from people. People say, "Come here, come closer." I'm like, "No, 6 feet." But yeah, so but I think addressing that is part of the equation, and also addressing what we're going to do with the kids who are 16 and coming into our job, coming in as apprentices into workplaces, who've had 2 years off from school and a year. We are potentially going to have to deal with young people, how they cope with the world of work and suddenly being exposed to a load of people. How does that feel?
Yeah, Rob, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to link back to that thing about the question around face masks specifically. There's an interesting piece of case law, recent case law that looks at this issue as well. So it's Cubilius versus Kent Foods. Obviously, it's specific on its own facts, so you can't read much wider than that. But in this case, somebody was dismissed for gross misconduct for refusing to wear a mask in these individual circumstances, and it was found to be fair, on those facts. Very, very specific though. It was a long distance driver going on site to a customer effectively, but it was found to be fair in that instance as well. So for those of you that haven't come across that case, it's quite an interesting read in this context as well. So yeah,
I do think the civil law will define some of these things as cases sort of come along. So and much of the civil law is complementary to health and safety law, but so where compensation has been given or received for work-related stress or mental health, it's not been on the background of legislation, but it's on the background of civil litigation. So it's possible, as you know, as ACAS will know, that we will find some of these questions will be defined by the courts for the purposes of you know, in terms of, and certainly possibly also mental health.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Just want to come back to, there's a question that's coming in, so it refers to a little bit along the lines of the story about the driver who refused to wear the mask but was travelling across the UK. So a question that came in is, where do employees stand on being told to return to the workplace and travel to other areas of the UK? Can we refuse? And before that question came in, I also had a question that had come to mind for me, is that obviously the employer is responsible for ensuring that the workplace is COVID safe. What consideration does the employer have to make about the employee's journey into work from home and then back home from work? Is that something that an employer needs to consider as well as this travelling across the UK with regards to carrying out their duties?
Yeah, so from my perspective, it's certainly something that they should be considering, because if it's a concern of the employee, really it's something which the employer should be speaking to them about to try and ascertain specifically what their concern is. You know, if there's anything they can do to alleviate that, any adjustments that can be made to you know, allay some of those fears, because ultimately, you know, as employers, we all want our employees to feel safe coming into work. We all want our employees to not have these concerns ultimately. So if we can speak to them and explore this in more detail, I think that really has to be the starting point with lots of this, whether it's about returning to the office or travelling once you're there. I think that's an important consideration. Lots of it also, though, does link back to ultimately what is their contract. You know, what's their contract say? Where's their place of work? What's the requirements of their contract? Because ultimately, that's still going to dictate, you know, to a large degree what you can and can't do with them in the future. So if the contract is clearly, you know, that they'll be required to go to, you know, X, Y, or Z, there's certainly an argument that that's something which they can still look to do in the future. It's just about having that conversation with them to make it as easy a transition as possible from the, you know, working from home environment to the usual way of working, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Another question that's come in, which is on a slightly different subject, might be one for you, Peter. How can we create the expertise and capacity to psychologically support and bring in interventions for our workforce?
Just being human. I know people, you know, people say, you know, what do you need? I mean, I'm a psychologist, but you know, you don't need a psychology degree to show compassion and empathy, which is what people are looking for. You know, one of the things that COVID-19 has done, if you look psychologically, is and one thing we fundamentally want is to be able to control our work and control our environment around us. COVID-19 took that away in essence from people, and actually what people want is to have that control again. So you can do, you know, you can train your line managers about having conversations with people about helping them to recognize triggers for mental ill health. But actually, and I did this with a group I worked in the foundry sector for a couple of months and did a mental health training with these foundry people. And one of the things I found was that actually, you know, you've got to make it relevant to them and actually say, it's what you would do at home, it's what you do with your friends. It's simply listening and trying to work with people to get a solution. Put people on training courses if you have the ability to, but actually I think it's a more basic inherent human instinct, which is to show that you care. I'm very fortunate. I have a line manager that contacts me most days and says, "How are you? Where you're at?" You know, and I benefit from having that. I think it's about that relationship. But yes, go on training courses if you want. But I think it's a combination of both. You know.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Does anybody else want to add, comment on that?
Yeah, Andy, I would just say it's kind of, you try to look for the positives in a deadly pandemic. And one of the things I've been hearing from quite a lot of employees and employers is that this has actually sort of brought them together, that feeling that we're all in it together, we're all kind of dealing with the same challenges, whether it's the kind of virus hitting people in your own family, or whether there's furloughing going on, people have lost their jobs. It's a shared experience, and that is actually given teammates and managers and supervisors the kind of opportunity to really get to know each other and share their experience.
Okay, Tracy. I think at this point as well, I would give a plug for Thrive at Work. We introduced the foundation level to Thrive at Work last year, kind of in response to learning that we'd gained from a pilot trial we ran with SMEs across the West Midlands, but also in response to the pandemic. So the foundation level we've created a 90-day program, which really helps an organisation to understand exactly where their workforce are at. So have a look at your sickness absence statistics, have a look at any other data that's available to you. Carry out a comprehensive survey amongst staff, ask them the questions: how have you been coping at home, or how has it been for you whilst you've been in the workplace? Touch on all of the lifestyle subjects as well as mental health, because there's many different routes into mental health. And as you've all commented, this is the first time that we're having a recession and a pandemic at the same time, and there was already a mental health kind of epidemic across the nation before that. So we've done what we can. You collate all your data, analyze it. We then help you to put together a really robust but bespoke action plan for your organization. Then there's lots of resources within our program to help you then, make sure that your line managers are confident and comfortable in having well-being conversations. I think for me, from what I've seen, that's where the workplace culture starts to change and shift in the right direction to be more supportive, because line managers are now having those conversations. Have those well-being conversations at every point that you can, and be helping and supporting and signposting your employees to the relevant sources that are out there. And we recommend a lot of resources that ACAS provide. They're in our toolkit. We recommend a lot of resources that HSE provide, especially the talking toolkit, because not just around mental health, that if you implement the talking toolkit, that helps you to have wider conversations if you've not been doing that up until this point. And our employers who had implemented Thrive before the pandemic came said that it really positioned them strongly to respond flexibly to the needs of their workforce and keep everybody together, and then help them navigate what's been uncharted territory for everybody. So that was the yes. Sorry, Peter.
To back you up, Andrew, sorry. 17.8 million days lost to work-related stress, 828,000 people off with work-related stress, depression and anxiety 1 week into the pandemic. So this was a problem before the pandemic. The data will be coming back in October. You could have a reduction because you got presenteeism. The problem hasn't gone away. In some cases, it may be hidden behind this lovely office that I've got in here, because but what we don't know until the new data. I'm globally, what we're seeing is a movement of people being impacted by this. People are recovering from COVID, from the physical symptoms, but we're not seeing the same level of recovery from people from a psychological perspective. So, people might then go and blame the pandemic on the numbers next year. Well, they were already high. That's a 2.3 million days increase in 1 year between last year's data and the previous data. So there is a problem, and it's a problem that potentially will need to be addressed going forward, because we've now got all of these other factors in place.
Absolutely agree with you there, Peter. And as well, and for us, what our organisations found as well, that even the mental health statistics were hidden, because rather than people saying, actually, I've got a mental health issue here, they were saying, well, I think it was just something that I ate, or I had a bit of a stomach bug, didn't feel quite right this morning, can't come into work. And then what you see is that conversation begins to open up, and people do then start to come forward and say, yeah, you know, actually it is anxiety, it is stress, but the employers are then better placed to support them because they, you know, they've got a better idea as to what the issue is. So for our organisations, we actually saw sickness absence kind of increase in the short term because people were more likely to come forward, but it gave the employer a chance to respond more flexibly. And then we've seen sickness absence reduce a lot of our across a lot of our organisations. It's improved resilience, it's improved retention as well. You know, this is what our businesses are saying to us. And obviously you've got a more productive workforce. If they feel valued, they feel genuinely valued and cared for, they want to come in and do a better job. And I think that as businesses are returning to the workplace, there may be an expectation from employers that you're going to need your employees to be at their best, because we might only just have survived the pandemic, and we need to kind of get back to where we were before that and try and you know, build better again. So I think there's quite a lot of issues that are really going to start to unfold as organisations come back.
The thing is, their best is your best. It's the organisation and them. Doesn't matter how resilient your people are when they get back. If your organisation isn't functionally managing the physical and the psychological pressures of this new work environment, people are going to go ill again, and they're going to get ill. And I think that's the really the important message, I guess, after when we put all of these protective mechanisms in place. If we suddenly go, right, we're just going to stop here and not address the psychological health as well as the physical health in equal parity, we're going to find we're going to have problems. And it's a generational issue potentially, what we're looking at. Your 10-year-old is going to be in 10 years from now going into work, but they've lived through this experience, so there's going to be consequences way beyond the next couple of years, the next 1 or 2 years. There'll be consequences, and we need to make work a place where health is promoted and not actually creates ill health.
Yeah, Robert, you were going to say?
Yeah, so I just completely agree with Peter then. Just anecdotally, lots of employers have been saying to me that they have seen really low sickness absence figures over the past 12 months generally, and I completely agree. I think that working from home is masking lots of these issues. So just again to echo that point, not to use this as the stats as a mechanism to stepping off the gas and having these conversations. It's important that we are still proactive in how we're supporting and managing people that are going to be suffering with these issues, because they are going to exist still. I completely agree. I think the working from home is masking them for lots of employers, but that doesn't mean that it's not there still. So just to completely echo Peter's point, then it's really valid, really important.
We are not made as humans to live in isolation, and we've always said as psychologists, loneliness is the precursor to depression. And you combine the pandemic and the lockdown, what do you have? You had a massive increase in isolation and an increase in loneliness. I've lived in this house, well, I've been in here for 12 months. No one in 12 months, bar one friend who was in my bubble, has come into this house. I haven't hugged my friends in 12 months. So it's a very different world. I'm an extrovert. I love hugging people. So next time you see me, come give me a big hug in the right times. But that's the burden that we won't see, and we don't see until we get people back to work, go back to work, and we have to engage. I just went to the pub when the pub's open, and it's still hard to step back in. But I sit on a table away from people, principally because they all know we work for HSE and we've got to do everything right, which I would. But it's an interesting experience, and I've got all the skills, haven't I? But it's still impacted me.
Yeah, certainly. So there is another resource on our website, if somebody can put that in the chat. So this is the second in our series of this type of webinar where we've opened it up to a wider audience and tried to cover a bigger topic. So the first one was around suicide prevention. We had an employer who had three employees come forward. Thankfully, because they were on Thrive at Work, these people felt they could share, thinking of ending their own lives. So we knew that we needed to respond. But that webinar is still available on our website for people to look at. Loads of resources that are available as well attached to that, just to help organisations try and identify early on signs of this anxiety that might lead into depression and onto suicidal thoughts. Loads of agencies across the region as well that they can then turn to get support for those people. So that's that one. Let's get back to the question. I just want to say to our audience as well that if we don't get through all of the questions today, we will try and do some kind of follow-up resource by email where we'll get the questions that we didn't get to. We'll try and get those answered for you, and we'll send out responses to you in a document so that you have those as well. So just get back to some of these questions. We might kind of go back to topics that we've touched on before, but obviously if people have got questions around it, then we need to try and answer those for them. It says, I've been advised that it is illegal to ask someone who says they're exempt from wearing face coverings or vaccines, especially as it states on the government website that evidence isn't required. Anybody want to respond to that? I have some blank faces.
I would say, Andy, that it's no kind of my expertise. I'm not involved in that legislation, but there always has to be that sensitivity. Seems to be my buzzword just now. But you have to be sensitive about why somebody's not doing something, and it's never going to be a black and white. You must, and the coppers are going to jump out of vans and take you away. So people do need to be sensitive and considerate. And yeah, I don't think somebody not wearing a face mask automatically means they're going to get arrested.
Okay, that's great. I know when I go shopping in my local supermarket, there's constant announcements over the tannoy, which I think are really good, in as much as you need to wear a face covering while shopping. However, if you are, please be aware that some of our customers are exempt from wearing a face covering, and might not be able to social distance either. So some employers have certainly taken that on board in the way that they're not only with their own staff but also with the customers that they're interacting with. I think you say it's sensitivity is the buzzword there.
There are also people who've had trauma experiences. So psychologically, wearing a mask could cause a significant reaction. So it's not always that people are being belligerent. There may actually be other reasons as well.
Okay, that's great. So another question coming in: what can an employer do if they have an employee refusing to return to the office and is against testing and the vaccination? The return to the office is because productivity at home is not as high as it is in the office, so the needs of the business require staff to start returning. Jug, do you want to come in on that one?
Okay, I suppose at the end of the day, it sounds as though the individual was working from home but wasn't as productive as they might have been in the office. So again, even though they're at home, it doesn't stop an organisation from managing the individual. If they're doing stuff at home and they are working from home, you manage them in the same way. You manage them remotely at the end of the day. Organisations should have processes in place to manage individuals who aren't performing. I suppose other areas that might have an impact on that is that it could highlight some training needs, and some organisations may feel that those needs they're able to address more in the work environment, shall we say. But I think the question is just because someone's not performing doesn't automatically mean it's because they're at home. It's about questioning, well, have I as an organisation been managing them properly, or have I allowed them to do what they do? And I believe that coming back into the work environment will allow me to manage it. Well, that's not a right answer. The right answer should be, I can still effectively manage them while they're still at home. If there is definitely a business need about having an individual back in the working place, then again, all of the stuff we've talked about, if an individual has got concerns about coming back into the workplace, it's about engaging with them. It's about gaining their understanding as to what their concerns is and exploring those concerns and seeing what they can do with regards to that. Ultimately, if they can work at home, it's about allowing them to carry on working at home and putting those mechanisms in to manage them effectively.
Yes, Peter.
It's about trust, okay? So 2 years ago, you asked your line manager, could you work from home? They say, no, we haven't got the systems and mechanisms to allow you to work from home. Can't do it. There's no precedence for it. March the 21st, and last year, the precedence was thrown out the window, and we moved swathes of the UK population to home working. Did the economy get impacted directly by home working? No. The point is, we had to begin to trust people and trust them in the context of work. So I think, you know, what Jacques is saying, which is actually, if you have people that are working from home, it is about having that trust relationship, about doing what you need to do, unless it's a key worker or less other workers which are required. And so let's be clear, we may not go back to open plan offices for 3-4 years. So what we're going to do for the next 3 or 4 years, and that is kind of the numbers that people are talking about through the World Health Organization and others, is full capacity, 100% in offices, is a distance off. So you're going to have to find ways to be flexible and allowing people to work from home, or 3 days in the office, 2 days not. You know, it's that kind of. I'd love to go in the office. We haven't had the opportunity yet. I did go in once accidentally. I thought I was supposed to be at a meeting, I wasn't. It was a great experience. There was no one there. So I think trust has to be rebuilt, and trust has to be that relationship. And that's not a lovely, soft, let's give you a big, massive hug Americanism. Okay, it's at the very basic core principles of work. Is trusting people to do the job that they do. So, and putting in mechanisms to help support them if you don't feel that people are working at the level that is necessary.
Okay, that's great answer, Peter, and from you, Jug. I just want to bring Rob in as well, because I know that when we spoke yesterday, you kind of touched on, you know, consultation, and it seems to me that that's an area here. You know, the question was about having an employee that was less productive at home, but it did seem that there were two issues to that. That, you know, they were wanting people back in the workplace anyway. What does an employer need to be considering at this point before they bring staff back into the workplace?
Yeah, really good point. Thanks for that, Andrew. And I think from our perspective, what we would say is any changes that you're looking to make at this point, whether that's, you know, bringing people back to the office, whether it's vaccine policies, whether it's testing policies, all of these sorts of contexts, really be emphasising the need and the benefits really of consultation in these areas. So whether that's consulting with existing trade union groups that you might have, or consulting with existing forums, or setting up new employee forums for the benefit of this consultation. Really just keen to emphasise the importance of doing so. Lots of the things that you can potentially do. So bringing someone back to the office, you know, in theory, subject to doing all the things that Jug said, subject to doing all the things that Peter's just said there as well. Ultimately, if it's someone's terms and conditions, you could require them to come back into the office because it's just that's what their contract says. You know, subject to complying with the HSE guidelines about that and those sorts of areas as well. However, you know, like I was saying, real benefits in consulting with people before we do so. So actually getting people on board with us, getting people to understand the reasons why we're making these changes and the benefits and the organisational benefits of making these changes as well. And I think in doing so, you're putting yourself in a much stronger position to take the difficult steps that might follow ultimately. You've at least given the chance to consultation, you've engaged people, you've got their concerns, you've addressed them. I think it's a real key step in keeping people on board in this journey with you in transitioning back to a level of normality as we go forwards. So in all the sorts of contexts we're talking about today, Really good point there about consultation, and don't neglect it, because it's such a valuable tool as part of organisational change. It's often overlooked to a detriment. Okay,
Rob. Yeah, and I'm kind of just thinking on my feet here as well. I guess that needs to be genuine consultation, because if you're doing a survey amongst staff, you're speaking with your staff, and the majority is saying we don't want to come back to the workforce, and that's the outcome of the consultation. But then you just blanket implement, you're all coming back. I mean, what would the and then there's this refusal, and you have this kind of to in and fro in between employer and employee, which could end up in dismissal. What's kind of like the repercussions of where you've actually consulted, but didn't, the employer didn't result they were after?
Yeah, I mean, that is a risk area, I suppose, but I guess it's not really about consulting in terms of what you're going to do. It's about consulting about the impacts of what you're going to do. So you're not giving them the decision as to whether or not they're going to come back to work, or whether or not you're going to implement this new policy or procedure. It's not about the yes or no. It's about all of the stuff in between. So the least impactful way of doing it, the most beneficial way, or the avenues that haven't automatically been considered. It's like picking up some of these areas and being able to go back to them with addressed concerns, rather than just imposing something which hasn't been necessarily fully thought through. So even if you do get an answer, actually people don't, the response is I don't want to come back to work, the general workforce don't want to come back into the office. It's about looking at the reasons why and seeing what you can do behind those areas, rather than just saying, well, you don't want to do it, therefore I'm not going to do it. All the details is where you can pick up from the consultation. That's where the benefit is in it for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's a follow-up kind of question that's coming as well. It might have come in at the same time. What process would you follow if somebody just refuses to return to the workplace? You've done the consultation, you've done all of your kind of explanation of, these are the safety measures that we've put in place, but somebody's just saying, I want to continue to work from home.
Yeah, so again, as long as you've had that full consideration with them, you're trying to explore the reasons why they don't want to come back. Make sure there's no sort of Equality Act reason why they don't want to come back as well, because you don't want to risk a discrimination claim on this basis as well, whatever that might be. Subject to exploring all these avenues, and again, making sure that you are complying with the HSE directives around about sort of safe environments, as long as you can comply with those as well. As long as it's within someone's terms and conditions that it's a requirement, or it can be a requirement, to work from an office, I think you could impose that. It's about putting yourself in the best situation to be able to do that fairly, ultimately, considering the HSE guidelines, considering all of the other bits that go before it. But ultimately, I mean, if someone's contract says they're required to work in an office, you could look to impose that in terms of, worst case scenario, I suppose, some sort of disciplinary process for not doing so, but certainly with a degree of caution. What I'm saying is, don't jump to that, because I think that's a risk in doing so. Organisations are just going to automatically discipline people for not wanting to come back without exploring all these reasons. They're the ones that are risking the claims. Ultimately, you have to go those additional steps, like Joe was saying in the context of another question earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, can I just, sorry, Andrew, can I just also add that, because picking up on what everyone's really said, if you think about it, we've been through lockdown, we've all worked from home. Some of those jobs that in our minds would have been office space are clearly being able to be demonstrated that they can be done at home nowadays. We can do things at home. So therefore, it's about organisations thinking about what is beneficial to all parties concerned, really, at the end of the day. Those jobs were office-based. Do they necessarily need to be office-based? Or is there somewhere that we got a middle ground between the two? Can we have some in the office and some at home? Or can we have a mixture of both? Again, it benefits all parties concerned, but it's about having those discussions rather than the mindset it's always been office-based and therefore it's going to continue like that. Think about all of the issues surrounding it and the implications of maybe thinking about things outside of the box that might actually work going forward.
Okay, another question that's come in, which I think just really sits nicely on the back of what you've just said there, Jug. And this is kind of about talking about the length of time that people have been working from home. So where do employers stand with employment contract law, with custom and practice, when people have worked from home for so long?
That's a really good one. We always come up with the custom and practice one. I think, you know, at the moment, the custom and practice argument, I suppose, is that we've had to go through lockdown really at the end of the day. There was no alternative to it. So would they be able to fairly argue the custom and practice should a claim go to tribunal? Because that's the ultimate test really at the end of the day, is a chairperson that can make that decision. I don't know whether they would be able to argue it under the current circumstances, because we've had to do it because of the situation and the circumstances due to COVID-19 that we've had really at the end of the day.
Okay, great.
I think lots of it depends on the communications that you had with them at the point where people got sent home as well. So if you sent people home and said, this is going to be, you know, indefinite, then, you know, crack on with working from home, you know, you're in a potentially weaker position than you are if you're saying, this is a temporary measure to accommodate the unique circumstances. So it depends on the communication you had at the time and the communications that you've been having throughout the life of the change as well. Ultimately, I think that will play a part. But I agree with Jug. I think someone just relying on custom and practice, having had a year working from home in an exceptional circumstance of a pandemic, probably going to be quite difficult to argue, but it ultimately would be up to the judge to decide that if it went that far, really.
Yeah. And one other point is that they all should have had some communication, some change to their contract to say that because of COVID that we're working from home at the moment anyway. So there should have been that communication there anyway.
Okay, I think that's an interesting point. You know, organisations may not well have been aware that, you know, they needed to make that alteration to the contract. And I also thinking, Rob, what you said about, you know, if organisations were saying that, you know, you're going to be working home indefinitely, was there really any other guidance from government at the time? Because nobody knew how long or quite what an impact COVID was going to have at the time. Would that be any kind of argument that we said that because we, you know, there wasn't really any guidance that it was going to be any different?
Yeah, I think it's rare for an employer that, I think it's unlikely that many employers would have said, go work from home now, and then, you know, we'll never come back to the office ever. And that's going to be rare in reality, isn't it? So most likely scenario is we've been told we have to work from home, here are the arrangements to go and do that. So I think in that sort of circumstance, I think you're right. Generally, most employers aren't going to be bound by those sorts of things, because the intention very clearly wasn't for permanent home working for the rest of time on that basis. So I think that in reality, that's probably, you know, the likely approach, isn't it? I think most employers are going to be able to show, actually, I didn't intend for this to go on forever, because, you know, why would they have, unless they've explicitly said that, which again would be rare, I would say.
But the only other issue though is employers are now saying, well, I can reduce my overhead cost on offices by having people working at home, and I know I can do it because I've had to throw a shed load of money at the IT to make it work. And if you look at the property discussions and that, and office developers are struggling to get people to go back to buy office space back off them, or to rent office space. So I think there's a sea change potentially happening in the way we work and how we work. You know, it certainly those in office space scenarios. I mean, obviously the factories stay open, the shops stay open, the hospitals, the schools, etc. But those who perhaps were based in offices, you know, it may be that your organisation says, well, it's cheaper, more economical to have you working at home and just to have team calls, and which is on one level seems right, but what we're finding is Zoom fatigue, Skype fatigue, everything, because actually it is very possible to sit in your office, as I do sometimes, and not move from this seat for 3 hours and have 4 meetings. Now, if you're in an office, you'd be getting up, you'd be moving around, you'd be doing different things. So yeah, there's been some very interesting papers that have come out about how to redefine and redesign the office in a post-COVID world. So if you're a geek, there's plenty of things that come to read, and so I guess I am a geek.
No, but it's a relevant point there, Peter. You know, I think I was in conversation with somebody the other day, and they said, you know what, if you're having the meetings in the office, for us at Combined Authority, all of our meeting rooms are on floor 1. And we're on floor 4. So even if you were, even if you were in back-to-back meetings, the likelihood would be that you would be at least walking from one meeting room to the other. You might take a toilet break, grab yourself a quick drink as you're, but you're physically moving. You're physically active, and off your bottom for even if it's only for like 20-30 seconds. But it also gives the head that time and space. There's a natural, that one meeting comes to an end. And then you've got that little bit of headspace before you go into the next meeting, so you're able to kind of recalibrate your thinking and focus, and just those little breaks where we are losing by back-to-back Teams meetings, Zoom meetings, go-to webinars. One of the tips that we're trying to get across the businesses, and I think that some of you guys have put this out as well, is that if you've got a meeting for an hour, set a timer. We have a timer on our Teams meetings now. There's only 5 minutes left. Set the meeting time for an hour, but only have the meeting for 45 or 50 minutes, and then be disciplined to come out. So you've at least got some time to kind of reset yourself mentally before you then go and sit back in front of the screen.
Question with an Amazon driver to ring on the bell.
Yeah.
And you have to go and say, webinar.
Yeah. Yeah. Question for you, I think, Tracy, here. It says, as more people return to workplaces, can we enforce testing at home or testing centres? This goes back to the face covering issue, people wanting to or not wanting to be tested. We focus on the rights of the individual, but we have a responsibility to the rest of the staff, plus protecting a business that keeps them employed. So really, where are we with workplace testing, and how does the testing process sit within where we are at the moment?
Again, it's similar to vaccination. You can't physically force anybody to have a test, but testing is freely available now. I think everybody across UK can access free lateral flow testing as and when. Again, it's that kind of personal aspect of it. If an employer is wanting to force an employee to take a test, why is that? Are they concerned that are they showing symptoms? Should they actually be isolating? If I was an employer, I would be encouraging the staff member to go home rather than to stay at work and have a test. They should be following the government advice that the minute you're sort of symptomatic, you should be isolating. So I would just be a bit sort of wary as an employer to sort of like blindly try and enforce testing for my workers.
Okay, great. Question coming in. This one, it's been asked to ask this one to Robert. I'm assuring you're allowed to phone a friend if you need to and confer with your colleagues. Can you give an example of when there might be an Equality Act issue when requiring somebody to come back into the office, given that pre-March 2020 that person was working in the office?
Yeah, so I think really if someone has specific concerns around exposure, either sort of getting into the office or once they're in the office, so if someone that's in a vulnerable category, for example, I think that's what I was talking about specifically. So someone that has a disability but has been advised to shield for the past sort of 12 months or part of that certainly, I think there's an element of risk there. Now, it's not an automatic, risk, it's not insurmountable certainly, but I can foresee an issue where someone that's been shielding for 12 months that's required to come back into an office that might have concerns about the way the office is operating or the way in which they're going to maintain the measures once they're in the office. The risk might be that if you're saying no, everyone has to come back regardless, that's where the sorts of risks might arise, particularly that people have to use public transport, that have to rely on those sorts of methods of getting into work. Without exploring those in more detail, without exploring the intricacies of that and just imposing blanket policies, that's where you might see the indirect risks come into it potentially.
Peter?
I think there's a probable case coming of people who have been exposed over the last 12 months and developed depression or anxiety. They need the criteria up to 12 months of this symptoms are there. So it could be, and I think this would be defined by the law, but it could be that where someone has experienced depression and anxiety over a 12-month period has been diagnosed, and that the act of returning to work in a physical environment may actually induce further trauma. that the courts may determine that, might make a determination that sits under the Equality Act. It's a bit of a jump, but you know, I've seen many of these cases coming through where this whole area is redefined, particularly in mental health and the Equality Act. Vicarious liability was established at a tribunal, which was to do with Green vs Deutsche Bank, where the employer was liable to look after the care of their employees from bullying and harassment. So it's not unfounded that we might find that the law might actually start to make judgment calls on the Equality Act, particularly around mental health as well as physical.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Question here: if you work in a satellite office, i.e. a separate office contract with an external landlord with lots of different organisations and not a head office, who has liability for external visitors and staff going into that office?
Andy, I'm not quite sure about in terms of liability, you know, what kind of legal angle that's come from, but in terms of protecting their health and safety and well-being when they come in there, it would be normally a kind of collective cooperative input. You know, you'd have the facilities manager, the person in control of the building, you know, so they would be putting in place social distancing in the common parts, and then whoever was actually controlling the part of the business or the part of the building they were visiting, again, you know, they should be communicating with each other to make sure that everybody is playing their part in the system to keep their visitors safe. So it wouldn't necessarily be one person, it would normally be a sort of collective cooperative approach.
Okay.
Our headquarters has 7 different government departments in, and I'm on the internal health and safety committee because I'm a trade union rep, and it's exactly as Tracy said, which is it's a combined effort. The building belongs to the property management, but people, we all have to work under the same basic principles when it comes to COVID measures. So that, you know, once you're in the building, but each of those government departments might have their own interpretation, but there are core functions that we have to follow.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Peter.
Our building feels very COVID safe. You'd hope so, wouldn't you?
You would. You would. Lead by example. There are no more questions in the question box at this point in time. You know, we're due to finish at 11:30. I'm not going to keep us online till 11:30 if everybody's got their questions answered. I just want to throw this out to each of the panelists just to have a think on. So the reason why we convened this webinar was to give employers some guidance around, you know, any changes to policy that they make when they take into consideration COVID-19, the vaccine, and testing, workplace testing. So to each of you, really, what do you think are the main? I know we've covered a lot today in a fairly short time, but what would you say is the main? What is the main consideration? What would you expect organisations to be amending within current policies? You know, when we consider where we are at this point in time, what is the area you would encourage them to stay away from changing to try and bring in, you know, these blanket measures or anything like that? So it's quite an open question to all 4 of you, and I'm happy to take, you know, if you've got any hopes that you know for the things that you would like to see, you know, change within policy within organisations. Anybody want to offer up in the first instance? I know I've put you on the spot there.
I think, Andy, I would say, you know, if you think where we are now compared to where we were 12 months ago, we wouldn't have been having a discussion about vaccinations and testings because they effectively never existed. So, you know, we've come leaps and bounds, haven't we? It's amazing that we're where we are now in terms, particularly the vaccination. But, you know, my advice would be don't take your eye off the ball. Now, isn't it the time to sort of give up on all those I keep sort of banging on about them, but particularly social distancing. I think it's easy for people to feel, they're vaccinated now, I'm okay, we're all okay, but you still need those fundamentals there. So my sort of message would be, great, encourage vaccination, encourage testing, but don't give up yet on the fundamentals and the basics that have helped us get to where we are now.
Okay, thanks, Tracy.
Mine would be the world of work is going to be very different, and it's changed, and it will continue to change over the coming years. And actually, your people's mental health is as important as their physical health and their physical safety, because one of the things that we will see is a range of very different emotions and different people coming into the workplace. I'm so conscious of apprentices that are going to be starting work after this. How do you prepare them for the world of work for the next 40 years or 50 years that are unfortunate, to manage the things that have gone on? So it's a very, very, from a psychology perspective, it's a very interesting time. We've got a lot of resources on HSE's website to look at the psychology. We've also got ISO 45003, which is the standard, which is coming out shortly, psychological health and safety at workplace. I was involved in the development of that standard, and that gives you a safety management system for psychological health. So, and trust your people. It's really, it's really, sorry. I'm in this.
Sorry, I'm jumping out. When is that coming out?
June. Comes out in June. Yeah, it was a tortuous process, but we got there. So,
I can see that being of massive benefit to employers across the nation.
So I keep moving around, but the sun has this thing; it's sort of tracing me around the room. So wherever I go, it seems to. I'm not that angelic normally.
But we expect it to be a good piece of work anyway, Peter.
It is. It's taken a long time, but I think we've got something that's reasonable.
Okay. We look forward to that coming out. That will certainly be an addition to our Thrive at Work toolkit, and I'm assuming that will have a prime place in one of our newsletters once it's released.
It's voluntary, so it's not defined, so it's not law, so it's recommendations.
Yeah. Best practice.
Best practice indeed.
Best practice. Wonderful. So, Rob, Jug, would you like to offer up some pearls of wisdom as we come to a close?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the temptations for organisations at the moment is to start making all these sorts of changes to policies and procedures to try and fit in with the the new world, if you like. Just be very mindful of the fact that all of our pre-existing laws on changing terms and conditions still exist. So consultation, again, I know I mentioned it earlier, but if you can get people's consent to make a change, that's often the best and most straightforward way of doing so. But in the absence of that, just be mindful of the fact that all of the existing law and case law on changing terms and conditions is still going to be live. And there are resources on the ACAS website which talks you through the process in more detail as well. So very tempting to make these great sort of swaves of changes with the best interests or the best intentions sometimes, but still be cautious that our pre-existing parameters are still there in that area.
Okay, wonderful.
And just to add to that, I would always say is engage with your people. The more you can engage with your people when you are putting any processes or any changes in place, the more it will allow you to take into consideration anything that they might need to consider that might have an impact on the processes and the policies that they're bringing in place. Because sometimes we know as employers, there's only so much that we're aware of, and then we make the change, we implement it, and then other things crop up. So the more that you can engage with your people, the more you'll find that whatever you're trying to bring in will then take into account all the different circumstances and maybe something that will be fit for purpose then. But for me, engagement.
You want to know where best exists? It's in poorly managed change. I walk into an organisation, they've got problems with stress. I said, when was your change program? They said, how do you know? I said, you can just tell. Poorly managed change. And what has COVID-19 done? Massive changes. And what did it do? Took away control. And what has it done? Increased demands, management standards, which are there. Look at these areas. So, yeah.
Okay, so that's wonderful.
I was quite passionate.
That's what we like. But it's an important topic, isn't it? You know, it's an important topic. We knew from the suicide prevention webinar that, you know, people's lives literally are at stake, because you just don't know what's going on behind the scenes and how everything else is just having those. It's a lot of little things having a major impact. So yeah, it is. You know, we do need to be passionate about this. We do need to get the message across.
We need to have the same passion about this as we did for asbestos, and for respiratory disorders, for cancers, for work-related cancer. That's where we're at. This is a health issue that is fundamental to where we go in the world of work. It is how we manage people.
Yeah, I'll just share a very quick good news story, I suppose. For me, it was where an organisation, I mean, I got contacted by, I knew the organisation, but also by individuals in it that said, we're happy going back into the workplace because, one, the organisation provided us with all the information that we needed, wherever we could get them, the various links that we needed. They actually engaged with us really early on, took on board all of the things that we suggested, and we worked together. So they're quite happy to go in work, and that's something that all organisations need to be involved in. So it's not just a matter of talking at someone, it's about collaboratively going along this journey together.
Wonderful. And I think the two messages I would put out, being an independent, you know, you can talk to ACAS before there's ever an issue that needs conciliatory work or that kind of engagement. And the other thing as well is that, you know, HSE are here to advise as well as enforce. And I think it's, you know, have the conversation before you know, you have your name in the email that comes out, said that, you know, this organisation was fined because they didn't do this. You know, we've got some great organisations here, some great agencies across the UK, but you know, please do plug into ACAS and plug into HSE if you want to follow up on this conversation, because, you know, we are coming to an end. There was one comment and question that came in from the same person at the end. Said, to conclude, I can't enforce my team in a manufacturing environment where face coverings, I can't enforce a vaccine, I can't enforce preventative testing, I have all of the COVID safety measures in place, sanitizers, screens, ventilation. Who do I protect? The person prepared to follow the medical advice, or the person who doesn't believe in the pandemic? As an independent, I would say you need to protect both. But you know, you can see the frustration in the question and the comment there. So it is.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, Andy, with you being sort of glib, it's not your role to protect everybody. You can only do what's reasonable and what's within your gift. So as an employer, you have to take the steps to protect you, your workers, and visitors to your workplace. In that workplace, you know, beyond that, it's you don't have to take responsibility for protecting everybody. It's just do what you can.
Wonderful. Do what you can. That's a good.
Same for stress and mental health. You can do what you can. You know, the fact is that people have things happening in their life and they come into work. But if as an inspector I go in and someone hasn't got a guarding on the machine, and they say, well, it's because I'm going through a divorce at home. It's not an excuse for me. You still need the guarding on the machine. Do you see what I mean? So it's the same sort of principle, which is, you know, we have to, you know, it's what happens in the context of work is where your responsibility is.
Okay, wonderful. Do what you can. I think we'll have that as the ending note on this webinar. 11:24. We've got 6 minutes back in our diary, which hopefully is enough to get up from where you were sat down and stretch legs and just get a bit of a break before you go into whatever you're going to be doing for the rest of the day. Really want to thank my panelists. Some wonderful knowledge, some great passion. Hopefully, as attendees of this webinar, you found it worthwhile experience. It has been recorded. We will make it available on our website. It'll be up on our YouTube channel. And feel free to, as I say, interact with ACAS, with HSE, or with the Thrive at Work team if workplace wellbeing is something that you really want to learn a little bit more about. But
if you're free at 2 o'clock, I have a Zoom meeting, Coffee with Pete, every day at 2 o'clock. I started at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'll run it till things disappeared. And it's just a breakout period. We can just have a coffee and chat. And sometimes we talk about psychology and work, and other times we'll talk about any range of subjects. But it's just a way of giving people a breakout. So that's but it's on my LinkedIn, and so come and follow me and have a coffee at 2 o'clock with me.
That's Peter Kelly, HSE, on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Coffee with Peter. We do a virtual kitchen at WMCA, but that's only for employees. But what a great idea! So if you want to plug into that, look him up on LinkedIn. I guess you can look everybody up on LinkedIn if they're there, and connect with us if you want to continue the conversation. Thank you to my panelists.
Canada, Australia, everyone just pops in and says hello. So it's great.
It sounds like I'm going to clear my diary. I may well be there with my
West Midlands. No, the West Midlands. Please, would be good.
I'll be there with my cup of tea.
Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you all again, panelists. Thank you to the team behind the scenes, Tia Smith and Lisa Ollis. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Really hope you found that worthwhile. Goodbye.